Marian Delyth, we're sitting in your lovely studio here in Blaenplwyf near Aberystwyth, and it's wonderful to chat to you actually, because we meet at Eisteddfods generally, and we talk about what's happened during the year. And I think it was in the last Eisteddfod, you kindly gave me your book, 60, which is 60 photographs. How difficult was it to put the 60 photographs together?
Hugely difficult, really. The idea I thought was quite a nice one because I was celebrating my 60th birthday, and it's usually, people go on special tours, or they wander around, or they have some kind of celebration. And what I decided to do was to go on a journey through my work I'd been taking photos for 40 years, and it was an incentive also to try and get my archive, which has been kept carefully, with indexed negative files. However, it hadn't been digitised, and also I just had written lists of images. So it gave me the incentive to actually get a list of all the images, well, most of the images I've taken, to put them in a Word document. So word search now enables me to immediately find a negative. So that was one way really of getting that kind of work done in the winter. But it was difficult because how do you choose 60 pictures? So what I did in the end, until about 2000, most of my work was black and white and film. Then there's a section where, until about 2004, where I was taking colour images, again on film. And then 2004, I went digital. So not only was there a huge range of subject matter, but also different media. But it was an interesting process to go through. I couldn't look through absolutely everything, but what I did really was to look at each decade and then made my selections if I'd had an exhibition or what was the major thrust of my work in that decade, and then made the selections. And the exhibition was in a space which had alcoves.
And the exhibition was at the National Library, of course.
Yes, it was in the National Library in the upper gallery, which is almost like a series of little rooms. So in the book, I've more or less followed the order of the exhibition. It made a little more sense probably in the exhibition because you were walking into these spaces and each space had images of a similar theme and of a certain period.
Did you make any discoveries while you were going through your archive?
Yes, always. I mean, like all of us, we go to do a job or something, but then there's about 2 or 3 images you might have taken or totally unrelated to that job, things you actually seen, and those are not always recorded in detail in my records. So it was nice to find the odd little image.
It's interesting, in the preface to your book, you talk about that first camera and your father's camera. What camera was it?
Oh gosh, I'm hopeless with technical things. It was an Agfa. I can't remember what they're called now, but one of those you open it out.
Oh, with the bellows and...
Yes, it was one of those.
And what was the attraction?
Well, I wondered what it was. I mean, what is interesting, I was 10 years old and I distinctly remember the experience of asking my father, could I borrow the camera to take the picture? And it was quite a challenging subject because it was a cave with candles in it.
Good gracious.
And I'm just wondering whether it was the light of those candles in that cave that made me decide I wanted to take that picture. Right. It took ages, and the whole family were fed up, I think, whilst I sorted out. And now obviously I'd help with taking a meter reading. Yeah. But it was quite a long exposure as well.
Right.
Yes, and that's another discovery I made. I actually found that it was in a scrapbook that my father had made, and it was a nice starting point, really.
Yes. So was your father an avid photographer, or was he an amateur photographer?
He was an amateur photographer. He was actually a teacher who taught a number of subjects from art to... He grew up in the period of the arts and crafts, and started teaching art, and then went on to teach metalwork, and in the end was teaching metalwork and engineering drawing. But he was very keen on photography. He had, and I still remember as a very small child going up to the attic, and we had a room cowdell, as we called it, which translated means a messy room,
Yeah.
which was just a dumping ground. But in that room, he had a little enlarger, and I remember being afraid to go into the room because it was dark, and there was a little red light in the ceiling. But after I'd ventured in and had enough courage to go in, I can still remember, like other people I suppose, seeing for the first time a plain sheet of paper in a dish of what I thought was water, and suddenly an image appeared, and it was such an exciting thing.
Yeah.
And that excitement I always felt in a dark room when you had a good image.
Yeah.
And in a way you still get that excitement in using a digital camera, I think, when you look back,
Yes.
or that image appears on the screen out of, in your browser or whatever.
Was he a good photographer?
He was meticulous. His main interest, an interesting story was that he was in the Air Force in the war, and went over to Normandy, worked as an engineer, and he sent a letter to his mother asking, please can you send my camera over, and the camera was sent over, and he actually took quite a number of pictures in Normandy during the war. But then after coming back, they were mostly romantic landscapes and photos of us as children, and also in school he would record,
Do you still have his archive?
Yes. It's in tin cans and in boxes, and it's not filed as such. But I did use some of his pictures. I had an exhibition in Ceredigion Museum a few years ago on the theme of memory and inheritance, and I printed some of his pictures and put them up on the wall.
Wow. It's funny you're talking about memory and boxes of tin cans full of pictures, because there are tin cans with pictures in everybody's house. And I have a theory that, generally speaking, mothers are the gatekeepers of photographs in families. I don't know what, it's a huge generality, I know. Those boxes are really quite important, and I was talking about this earlier today, actually, with Chris Tancock, and we were... when I find boxes of photographs in old shops and things, and it's people's lives and people's memories, and I find it quite tragic, really, that they're sitting there and nobody knows anything about them. So these archives are really important. And in this digital age, of course, where everything is on hard drives, there isn't that memory box, if you like. And I like dipping into the memory box. Do you dip into your family's memory box?
Yes, very often. There's one seminal image, a very important image, actually. It's in that book, where I found a picture he took of his mother in the field down there behind the house, the third field, Casquar, as we call it. And I printed it, and I then took that photograph in my hand and took a photo in the exact place it was taken.
Yeah.
And to me that was a very moving experience, because my grandmother died before I was born, so I never knew her. The only way that I know her really is by people's stories and by this photograph, which is a wonderful photograph as well. So it shows the importance, really, as you say, of keeping these family photos, and it just showed in a very direct way how photography can transfer memories from one generation to the next.
Yes, so which is vital, I think. And I know you travel a lot throughout Wales. I mean, you have your camper van, your famous camper van. So I guess you've seen places change as well, Marian, because I guess you revisit lots of places. I have a feeling that you do. I don't know if that's true or not. Is it true?
Yes, not sometimes not deliberately, but if you do take a lot of landscape photos or photos for books, I mean, most of my work has been in the publishing industry, then you find yourself returning time and time again. And I find it very interesting, because I'm taking photos from a different perspective now. As a young photographer, you're full of excitement and you're taking new images. Now that I've reached this age, I've got 40 years of images behind me. And so the perspective changes a bit, doesn't it? When you see a place that you might have photographed 35 years ago, I find that really interesting. And actually, I'm very much aware these days that when I'm taking a photo, I'm in that second, I'm in that moment. I can look back on images I've taken in the past, but also with one eye towards the future, knowing that will be a record of this moment, which will be kept for posterity.
Yes. And the square mile is important, isn't it?
Yes, that was really important, because I first became involved and passionate about photography when I went to Newport College of Art. But I didn't go there to study photography. I wanted to be a graphic designer. I was quite determined and sort of wanted to gain the skills to be a book designer. I was that focused. But having gone to Newport, one day I sneaked into the lecture theatre where David Hurn was giving a lecture on photography. And suddenly my eyes were open to this wonderful medium, and then I would very often sneak into their lectures. But one thing I was very much aware when I was in Newport, there were a lot of people taking photos in the South Wales valleys, doing important work, documenting, because of the location of the college, of course. So when I graduated from Newport, I decided I wanted to spend more time exploring photography and documentary photography. So I was fortunate to be accepted in Birmingham for an MA course, which was quite new then. It wasn't a course as such, you went there with a programme of work. And I decided I wanted to document a hill farming area in Ceredigion, which was corresponding really to the work that was being done in South Wales. But I didn't see a lot of it being done in north and rural parts of and in farming communities in West Wales, and more specifically in a Welsh-speaking area, because the Welsh, most of my work really is within Welsh language culture, and that was facing a crisis in the 1970s, because with rural depopulation, the communities that were the cradle of the Welsh culture were being destroyed, really. People were moving away because it was impossible to earn a living. Incomers were moving in at that time as holiday homes, and so there was these huge changes happening in the 70s. And of course the Filltir Sgwâr, for you and people who speak Welsh, resonate with the work of DJ Williams,
yes,
who wrote about these kind of communities and was a famous Welsh language author. So I took that as a theme, as a title for the exhibition, but also, it describes the kind of close-knit communities that existed in rural Wales and still do to a large extent. But I also took the literal meaning of that, because it was the age of conceptual work, and I thought it would be interesting to go back to the earliest maps I could find of the Mynydd Bach area, which were tithe maps, and then I marked an exact square mile and made a note of every home or dwelling that was marked within that area, and visited each location. And some of them were ruins, some of them were, you still had Welsh families going back generations farming there. Some were holiday homes and some were just empty. But what was interesting, and I did, to be fair, I did also select a square mile that I felt was a kind of microcosm, if you like, of that kind of community. But there were 2 shops, a chapel, a school and a church within that square mile. And today they've all gone. Well, in fact, the schools and the church and the chapel was closed within a few years of my having recorded it. So it was an important record. It was a time of great change.
Did you get to know the people?
Yes. I think I had an advantage in the sense that because although I was considered a townie, coming from Aberystwyth, my father obviously came from this area, so I belonged to the same kind of culture and background in a way. And so I think I probably gained access and trust quite quickly, really. And there were some amazing characters there. And the sad thing is that only a few weeks ago, EMYR Hopkins, who was, he and his family were great help in helping me with connections. He's recently died, but he was really interested in the history of the area as well.
Do you think you'll ever go back and revisit and reshoot?
Well, I did go back. The initial project was in 1976-77. I then went back in 2006-2007 to re-photograph. And I haven't done a huge amount with that work so far. I think I would probably make one visit again and bring the work together. Because it shows the changes that have occurred in the rural areas and in the farming community, and also in the method of farming, you know.
Yes, indeed.
And so yes, I think it's an important record.
Right.
But it hasn't been, you know, I had an exhibition back in 76 and a small exhibition within that area up on Mynydd Bach in 2007, and a TV documentary was made of my work there.
Right.
So that is.
How important is exhibiting to you?
I like to exhibit. Exhibitions are quite time consuming, but I quite like it in the sense that it's a different method of communicating. I think also it focuses your mind when you're actually selecting a certain amount of images, and it's a slower process, isn't it, than just selecting images, putting them on screen. So yes, I have. In fact, last year it was I had 3 exhibitions, which on top of the work in the National Eisteddfod.
Yes.
So it was a bit too hectic last year. But I think it's you know, tied in with the exhibition. Then I will usually give a talk, and it gives me a chance to engage with the public, which people who do not necessarily go on the internet and will look for images, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite nice to be able to share images that you've taken within a locality with the people who were involved and are part of the project, really.
Yes. And what sort of do adborth in Saesneg? I'm looking for the English word here. The reaction. What sort of reaction do you get from showing your work? How do people, especially people who are probably maybe not used to going to exhibitions, what sort of feedback do you get?
On the whole, I think they're quite thrilled. They're quite, you know, because sometimes, you know, I am careful that if I'm photographing somebody, that I have their permission before exhibiting or publishing or whatever. And sometimes you're a bit wary, you know, what you know, you think you know you've got a really good image, and you're afraid of what if they refuse permission, you know. But on the whole, I think people are quite thrilled, and it's interesting to hear the discussion that goes on amongst people who are not involved with photography. And it was really quite wonderful to read some of the comments in the National Library in the visitors book. That gave me because photography sometimes can be a lonely old profession,
Yes, that's actually, that's a little thread I'd like to follow, because to me, it is the loneliness of it is its beauty in many respects, because I get into a bit of a zone after a little while. It takes me a bit of time to get into that sort of frame of mind of working an area or working with people, or and I lock off and I become it's an inward sort of thing, and the only way I can deal with a situation is through my camera. Do you find the same thing yourself?
Yes, I think the camera also, I think, is a tool for contemplation as well, and I think it makes me see the world not in a different way, but it makes you look, and I think it's a tool that I use really for developing an understanding of the world. It's not just about taking pictures, is it, and snapping. Not in my case anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yes, yeah.
And I think I have grown, if you like, by using photography and using the camera.
You say you sneaked into David Hurn lectures. What was it about David Hurn that turn that switch in your head to think, this is what I really want to do?
I think, first of all, showing the work of brilliant photographers that have worked in the past, and photographers you would not really come across unless somebody actually presented their work to you. I think also he still is a very good communicator, and can convey a commitment, and also the ethics of photography, I think, and so I found...
Let's expand a little on the ethics of photography.
Well, do people, really think about that side of things when they see people with cameras? And I think it was really about showing that as a photographer you have a responsibility towards the subjects that you're taking. That is something I take quite seriously. I don't like to feel that I'm using people. Mm-hmm. I think that can be done sometimes. I think it is.
Yes.
It's a factor in some people's work. I think I feel uncomfortable with some images.
Yes.
So I think I think because he is a committed photographer, possibly that came across as well, and I just thought it was a brilliant medium, really, for observing the world around us. Also, I was then, and still am to a certain extent, quite a shy person. And I think photography is a brilliant medium for somebody who is just a little bit shy, because it enables you just to be quiet in the background and see events developing, and you're recording them. And that's the kind of photography that I really like.
I mean, recording the world around us. Do you think that is the main purpose of a photographer? Is that our only purpose, do you reckon?
I don't think it's the only purpose. I think that photography can be used for all number of purposes. I think the one thing that all of us can give is presenting the way that we see things. So and presenting images in a way that hopefully makes other people think about the subject matter.
Yes.
So it's not just about purely recording, is it?
Yeah.
Otherwise we'd just be walking around and clicking cameras without thinking. You can actually record. You can actually record without a thought process behind it, really. Can you?
Yes, and I think the thought process is very valuable, because it allows... I see, that's the problem I have probably with the digital age, if you like, is the fact that there is less care is taken with photography and less time is given to photography, and everything is... The photographer becomes the last link in a chain, I find, especially with a lot of work I do. I don't know if you feel the same in that respect.
Yes, I mean, looking at the way I've developed, I mean, I'm also someone that at the end of each year will reflect on what I've done during that year. Because when we're taking images, we're working within time-space. But also, when you think of it, we're also operating within time-space in our own lives.
Yes.
In the last few years, I've turned away really from commercial work, and I'm earning less money these days, but I'm working on my own personal projects because I know I've only got a certain amount of time left. I've got less time left than I've had. So I want to use it wisely, and I want to prioritise. And I'm also a bit disillusioned with digital photography in the sense that it has become so easy just to take a picture. And I've never been a photographer that just likes taking pictures every day, all day, of anything at all. I'd rather work on subjects that are important to me, or themes that are important, even if it means, and I think you have to devote time to that. You can't just fit it in half an hour after finishing a job for somebody else. And also I find we all have our own voice, and I think that is the unique thing that we can give and use. I think the tendency with a lot of commercial work, I find that I'm producing work that I know the client wants, which might not be the way that I see the world or the way that I want to create images. And so it's quite nice to sort of take a step away from that and just slow down, really. I think it's I've been tempted to go back to using film. I can quite understand why photographers use film. What I've tried to do is to go back to the way that I used to work with film, although I'm using a digital camera, because I think there's too much just taking pictures and then editing and finding, it's easy to have a law of averages, isn't it? If you take 100 pictures and then you look through them all and say, oh, I like that one. Well, that's not just what it's about, is it?
Yes. I agree with you, because when because I sort of began being professional on the cusp of film, and so I did a bit of film, but then it was digital seemed the obvious route to go. And when I first started shooting digitally, I used to shoot, I don't know, hundreds of pictures. And when I look back at the stuff, I mean, there was only very few of them were really that good, to be honest. So, and now I shoot very little, where I used to fill cards before with stuff. I barely fill half a card now, or even a quarter of a card when I go out, because I know, you kind of know instinctively, that the stuff you're doing and the angles you're taking is correct. So if going back to film, lots of people would say that would be a retrograde step, but is it the slowing down that you think is the key to that?
Well, it's a different medium as well, so there are different qualities with film.
Right.
But I mean, I would do it, firstly, I think, just to slow myself down.
Yeah.
I mean, to put it mildly, yes. Yeah.
Have you worked in larger formats as well, or have you been 35mm?
No, I have done medium format. At one time I I still have got a Hasselblad. I still haven't got rid of it. And that, especially with landscape work, and there is something really quite lovely about just having 12 exposures. So you are thinking carefully about what you're taking and being very selective. But I couldn't do that all the time, because sometimes I do see myself very often as an instinctive photographer. Instinct is not the right word, because it's not completely instinctive. But I will respond to what's around me, as opposed to having some kind of pre-visualization and seeking a certain image. But sometimes, of course, with commissions, you have to do that.
Yeah.
You know what the client wants, and so you're looking for it.
Yeah. You're working on a particular project which is very close to your heart, I know. You're working on about and making pictures about Bardsey Island, and essentially, which is a far nicer name than Bardsey. Sorry about that, but it is. An essentially is. An essentially. How important is that island to you?
It became hugely important to me. I first went there for commissioned work, actually. I needed a picture of the island for the book Cymru o Hyd, or Eternal Wales as it was translated. Yeah. And I went there for a day.
Which was the stuff for, where Gwynfor Evans
yes.
wrote the text, yeah.
And I think that was about, that was in 2000, the year 2000. I was using film, and it was an awful day in terms of weather, but I did manage to get a few pictures. But I just fell in love with the island. I literally just fell in love with the island. And so I then used to visit every year and have a week there. And I think part of the attraction of the place was that you're going back, 15 years. There was only one place you could have a mobile phone signal, and it meant walking out to some rock, And once you're on the island, unless you climb up to the mountain, you don't see the mainland at all. So it was just the best way, really, to have a chill out, because nobody could get in touch with me. I couldn't see, nothing reminded me of all the pile of work that I needed to get done. And so I think that was partly the attraction. But then having, all I did there, there mostly was take pictures anyway. So I had about 15 years of pictures. And it was the complete opposite of the last book I did, which was 100 places in Wales to visit.
Yes, indeed.
So I went from visiting 100 places in all parts of Wales to concentrating on a little island that's about a mile long,
I'm intrigued. How did you tackle 100 places in Wales? I mean, obviously there was you had a list, a bucket list of places to visit. And tackling all these places, because of obviously weather and everything affects the photograph. So how on earth did you go about it, Marian?
It was a challenge. At times it was wonderful, at other times it was so frustrating. Because actually the 2 years that I did most of the work for it were the worst 2 summers we've had. And I was trying to group the places, so I would go in my camper for 3 or 4 days. And invariably, the first day would be, I'd keep one eye on the weather forecast. I couldn't always go there because I was doing part-time teaching anyway and doing other commercial work. So I would travel up and I'd have one day wonderful light and everything. Then the following day it'd probably be pouring with rain. And that's why some of the images in the book are quite close. I actually quite like the idea of going to a location and taking a wide vista or a wide shot. And then very often I'll zoom into a very small detail within that location. That I find really interesting. Yeah. And of course, by using both images, you are making the link. But some of those images were taken simply because the weather was so awful that there was no way I could get a decent wide shot.
Of those 100 places that you visited and photographed, were you given a brief, by the way? I am intrigued. Were you given a brief or was it, Marian, go and shoot 100 places in Wales?
What do you think? You worked in Welsh publishing. What happened was I actually went to the Lolfa with a few ideas for books, and they didn't fancy any of my ideas. But they then turned around and said, "Well, we don't really want to publish anything on those ideas. But how about going around Wales? We've got this idea of publishing a book, 100 places in Wales you should visit before you die." And do you ever refuse a job? I thought, well, that sounds interesting. At the time they hadn't even got an author. And I said, well, okay, fine, What was unexpected was that John Davis went on a different tangent to what other people probably would have done. I mean, this was a time of, publishing all kinds of books on 100 places or 100, which are mostly beautiful places or very romantic places. But John decided that he would take advantage of this opportunity to introduce people to the industrial history of Wales. So although there were a few sort of romantic places, there were a lot of churches, but also a lot of post-industrial areas. And that was fascinating. You know, it was completely different to what I would have expected. Had its own challenges, but really I'm grateful for that, because it led me to places I wouldn't have gone before, you know, down in the post-industrial areas of South Wales and North Wales as well.
So you have a library of OS maps, I guess, Mark?
I always carry them in the van. I've always, since I can remember, I've always had vans, you know, this one I've had since 2004. And I've got 2 box files full of OS maps, which have got all kinds of notes on them, and stars and circles and squares, and they might make a nice exhibition one day.
They might indeed, actually. They probably would make a smashing exhibition.
Well, actually, on that, I was earlier this year, I was looking at the catalogue of Kudelka's exhibition, Nationality Doubtful, which has been in America. Is going, if it's not already there, it's going to Spain, I think, later this year. And there's a lovely double-page spread in the back of that book of his notes on maps, which is fascinating, and it's an artwork in itself.
Yeah. Of those 100 places, go on. I got to ask you the question. I'm like, one place.
Oh, I can never choose. I really can't.
Okay,
and by
2.
now, it's so much in the past, I can't even remember the 100 places, you know. It's very difficult to choose. And of course, what was really funny was John and I had, not a huge argument, but we had a disagreement because he hasn't included an Isensi. And I said, you must include an Isensi. In my mind, it's one of the wonders of Wales. And he said, no. In fact, there are very few areas on the Llŷn Peninsula, which I think is a wonderful part of Wales.
It is a wonderful part of Wales. It's you know, Tre'r and all those places.
Yes,
fantastic. And I remember going to Nant Gwynedd before it became, you know, a centre to learn Welsh.
Wasn't it fantastic?
It was a fantastic place. We used to go there on little pilgrimages and throw rocks into the sea at Nant Gwynedd. Wonderful. And go to, you know, little villages in Penllyn. Strange that, isn't it, that he didn't pick many from that area.
Well, I think his argument with first of all, he'd never been there anyway, and he had no intention of going there because he felt there was his theme was that man had left his mark on these areas, and of course they have on Isensi.
Yes.
But never mind.
Yeah.
But the one place that I always go back on a kind of pilgrimage, because it's a place that and you've been there as well, I think, I really like, is the Ewyas Valley.
Yeah.
Capel Ffoton.
Yes, beautiful.
That area. There is something special about that part of Wales that I first sort of saw it when I was in college, and I will still make a visit there at some point every year in my camper, and just camp overnight and listen to the hooting of the owls and.
Yes, it's extraordinary. I find the trees there extraordinary.
Yes, it's a wonderful landscape, and there's a wonderful atmosphere there as well.
Yes,
and you can see how Eric Gill and David Jones and people like that were.
Yes, I was intrigued because when you look at the trees, you can see David Jones's paintings.
Yes,
they're extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I found what was strange about it is that you have beth yw angydffurfiol yn Gymraeg?
A non-conformist?
Non-conformist chapel there, and the church itself.
Yeah.
And they both live equally nicely together.
Yes. And they're quite close, aren't they?
Yes, but I found Capel Ffoton and the yew trees in Capel Ffoton really. I find yew trees. Do you like trees?
Yes, you can see them out through the window there, and it's fascinating. I mean, every time just looking out through the studio, the window. Sometimes they're shrouded in mist, and they're mostly yew trees. Yew yw on then? Nage.
Naki.
Ash. They're
Yeah.
mostly
Ash.
they're mostly ash trees, so they've only recently come into full leaf,
Yeah.
and they're like skeletons in the winter, and then yeah. But I think trees are an important aspect of our landscapes. Really.
Yes.
But
I like the trip from Capel over the mountain as well. That's a nice area. And bleak. The last time I went there, it was the mist had come in really hard, and it was drizzle, and it was and I met a hedger by Capel I did. I met a hedger, and he made hedges, and very interesting gentleman. Folded them, yes. Yeah. And explained to me that folding there was different to folding 10 miles down the road. Right. But I find that those serendipitous moments when you're out taking photographs are very joyous. I don't know if you feel the same thing, and if you had any experiences.
Oh, wonderful. I remember one morning, early in the morning, I was up right at the top of the Towie Valley, and I was taking photos again for the Gwynfor Evans book, I think. And suddenly I just heard clip, clop, clip, clop. In the distance, I could hear the hooves of a horse coming down, and met a lovely young man who lived in Newport in Pembrokeshire, and in the winter would travel the routes of the Porthmen, what are they? The drovers. The
drovers, yeah.
Over the mountain, and would just with his horse. And he had a horse and a dog, and would, sleep in barns or whatever. And you just meet these wonderful people, and there was something so wonderful about it,
Did you take the opportunity to photograph him as well?
Well, of course.
So, and essentially, the Bardsey project is well on its way. You've done the hard work, I guess, and the editing of the pictures. And I believe you designed the book as well, yes?
Yes, that's one advantage, really, because although I've never stopped taking pictures since 1974, I've earned my living. Well, I earned my living for many, many years as a book designer. So because I've got the skill of a designer, well, I hope I have by now, it enables me to control the way that my pictures are used, which I think is the bane of many photographer. Once your photos have gone to the publisher, sometimes you just have no control about how the way they appear.
That is a very frustrating thing. That's one of the most frustrating things I've found of late. Yeah. Is the inability to control what happens, and people you send your photographs in, you've edited them down, but they require so many photographs, and then they choose, and I find that really great sometimes. I don't know. But.
And also, to be fair, I hope, throughout the years, when I've been dealing with other photographers' photographs, that I have taken a lot of care, because I know how they would have approached the work and how much effort has gone into composing those pictures. And very often you'll find, some people will just crop pictures indiscriminately, and it destroys the whole image, and the image that the photographer
yes,
created.
I know. The one dreadful, and I won't mention who or where, but they squashed one of my photographs, which was one of the worst things that I've ever seen in my whole life. When I opened the book, I was most distressed. They literally squashed the photograph. It was a landscape, and they pushed it all in, and everything is out of kilter and distorted. I was shocked that they even thought about doing that sort of thing,
Well, that's the problem of digital using in design, isn't it? I mean, when I think the days that I would spend designing a book, in the days when you actually had to draw every single square, and you had to paste all the pictures in, and you scaled all your photographs. These days, you can in InDesign you can just change the shape of that frame, and lazy designers or people who are not particularly careful with images will simply squash your photo to fill whatever gap they have. Yes. Whereas it should be the other way around, the image, and then you fit your text around the image. But,
do you think your career really as a designer then has informed the way you photograph, the way you frame stuff? Perhaps you'd like to explain a little bit of that sort of thought process?
Yes, because to me, composition is hugely important in images. Having said that, I know I've probably lost a couple of pictures because I was so concerned with composing within that frame that I might have missed an important moment. But I still, in my mind, very often when you've got two images, you're comparing them, then composition is hugely important. I mean, Cartier-Bresson was the classic, wasn't he?
Mm.
And he had this technique that he used, that when he couldn't decide between, two or three pictures, he would turn them upside down, so they wouldn't make sense in terms of the subject matter. Mm. And then he would see which ones had the strongest formal elements, and the contrast of black and white, and he would make a selection on that. And I don't do that, but I think it's almost inevitable, isn't it, that if you've been working as a designer, that it does influence the way that you compose your pictures in the frame. And equally, when I'm taking photographs for somebody else, I know that a designer is going to have the challenge of fitting text and images together. Yeah. So I will take my pictures in a way that gives him a certain amount of leeway. Or I'll take a series of landscape and portrait, so that if he has to choose between them, at least I'm certain that I'm happy as well that the image fits within the format.
Do you, maybe this is a silly question, and shoot me down in flames if you think it is, but do you think there's such a thing as Welsh photography?
I'm not sure how concerned I am about that, in the sense that I think there's a danger that if you call something Welsh, that people have some preconceived idea of what it should be.
Yes.
In terms of being Welsh, I consider anybody who comes to live here and who has respect and appreciates the history of this nation and the multicultural aspects of it. They're Welsh, and I welcome them with open arms. But the danger is that if you say Welsh photography, that it has to be a certain kind of... I think it is important. One thing I have done throughout the years is, the one area we haven't spoken about is that I've taken a huge amount of documentary work on activism of all kinds and campaigns. And that means the road to self-determination in Wales, the campaigns for the Welsh language. Yes. But I see those side by side with campaigns for the environment and really everything that makes this world a better place. And I had an exhibition in Cardiff quite a few years ago now entitled Radical, where I brought all these elements together. And because I think sometimes people can become a bit obsessed, thinking that somehow campaigning for the Welsh language is somehow narrow-minded or whatever, where it's part of the overall campaign to make this world a better place and to give every language and culture the respect that it deserves.
Do you think, I again, a very general statement, but I think in Wales we tend to be... We don't see pictures. I don't know if that's true or not. I think we get pushed to one side, that image makers are pushed to one side, that it's the word that's important in Wales, or if you sing, it's even more important. But do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. I sometimes find that the frustrating aspect of being Welsh, I suppose. Do you find that?
Certainly in the past. I think things are changing a bit now because young people are being educated in visual arts, and I think the education system probably is a bit helps in that respect. But yes, it's true. And it's because Wales has such a long tradition of bardic history. Yes. and literature.
Yeah.
So I think it is, to go back to this business of Welsh photography, yes, I think we should be, and I think you're doing a great job in that, really, in seeing what's being done in Wales. I think we should really be having a discussion about how how we present ourselves, really, and how we record. And that Welsh photography is considered like Czech photography, or or Australian photography,
yes, indeed.
or European photography, really,
Yeah.
in the tradition of European photography.
And what about being a woman working in photography in Wales?
That is really interesting. I've never considered myself as I am a female photographer,
No.
And interestingly, I haven't really gone down the road of working with issues that are important to women, I suppose. Sometimes it can be quite lonely, because I still remember going to Birmingham to the photography school there. And I was there in the end of August because I was doing the MA. And then gradually they had a whole host of courses there in City and Guilds and degree courses. And I was seeing all these new students coming in. And I think even though they, as the second year was better, but I think were we half a dozen women or young women then, in hundreds of students, really. And it's only now that I've suddenly, looking, because we get to a certain age and we look back, there haven't been many women photographers, I don't think, that have been working for 40 years, I would imagine.
No.
And that's interesting. I'm not saying I'm special because of that, but it is an interesting. I think these days you see more young women photographers, and that's a great thing.
Yeah.
But there are times it has been quite lonely, especially as sometimes there is a. I think sometimes I do feel there's a bit of a macho.
Have you developed sharp elbows?
No, I find it very difficult, but I have been elbowed a few times
Right.
in circumstances where it wasn't even necessary, really,
Yeah.
to get the shot. But I've got my own technique. Because I'm small, I can actually go underneath their arms, and and suddenly they have this head appearing in front of them. But I don't do it too often. But I have been known to go underneath people's arms to get my shot.
Right.
And it's an interesting angle,
So what next for Marian Delyth?
Well, a bit of a chill out after the book. I can't remember when I last had a holiday, but I have, in order to keep myself alive, last year I did start a 10-year project, which I'm not telling anybody about, in the hope that it'll keep me going for 10 years.
Could you give us a little clue?
No, I'm not saying anything until at least 5
Marian,
years.
you tears.
But what I would like to do with it, I have got some loose ends on some projects. I would also like to do some more travelling. I did go to Africa, did a project in Swaziland
Yeah.
in 2004. So I want to return there. And in order to do things like that, you need to devote time. You can't fit it in amongst, So this next year now, I'm hoping to do some more travelling. And also thinking of a journey in my camper van, I think would be a good idea.
Yes. Good old
I have this
camper.
idea of just jumping into the van and just travelling south. No plans, nothing at all, and see where I end up. Taking photos on the way.
And stopping for lengthy periods, maybe, along the way.
I
And
might
making
not-
nice cups of tea in your van. And it's my dream to have a van. So if you sell yours, Marian, I'll buy it.
Right, okay. I'll remember that.
There's the Philip George Griffiths exhibition happening. How important a photographer do you think he was?
Hugely important. And I think we can be so proud that he was a Welsh photographer. There's no need to go on about how... sorry, I'm just a little... yes, I think he was... I had the privilege of meeting him a few times. Didn't know him well, but he would come to the Lens Festival in the National Library. I had the privilege of giving him a tribute after his death in that festival, which was a very moving experience. It's a shame we didn't have him for a few more years, but I think he's fantastic, and absolutely hugely important in terms of commitment, in terms of, I think, do we all have this desire to leave the world a better place than it was when we arrived?
Yes, which is one of his big maxims, wasn't it?
Yeah, and he certainly did that by raising awareness of man's inhumanity.
Well, Vietnam Inc. was a seminal book. And as well, he didn't forget his roots either. Rhythm and talking about Wales was quite important to him. And he, I think I read there's some stuff in the Recollections book about him unable to cross the road because people were coming and going on their holidays and things with his family, and he was going to chapel. And he didn't mince his words.
No.
And I think he didn't mince his words as photographically either, did he?
No, and in Wales, there aren't many people like that, really. I think when you're talking about not mincing his words, and interesting perspective as well, where he could see the similarity between, for instance, the drowning of Tryweryn or Capel Celyn with what was happening to the culture in Vietnam.
Yes.
And to make that link, I think, is important, And
do you think there will ever be a place where we can see Philip Jones Griffiths' work, whether he was because he wanted to have, his legacy, and his legacy he felt was important and that it should be here in Wales. Do you think we'll ever see?
Oh, I'm sure we will. I don't know what the latest is, but I thought there were very definite plans.
Ah, right, okay.
Where his work will be archived and kept in the National Library, but there will be an exhibition space in this new development in Bangor. Am I correct?
I wouldn't know. I don't know.
I believe that is the plan. That was the intended plan, but of course there have been problems with this place in Bangor. But yes. It was his desire that both aspects be together, that the storage and the archival, and with a place to educate young people especially,
yes,
would be in one location. But that is not possible in the National Library.
No.
But I'm looking forward to the exhibition.
Oh, me too, yes.
And also, of course, they've got the archival storage to keep his work in pristine condition. But certainly, and hopefully there will be publications, and it's been, it's important, isn't it?
You mentioned education there, and I think that's something we touch upon when we have these discussions. How there are numerous courses now to learn how to be a photographer. I don't know. What's your take on that? How do you think that it's a good thing, a bad thing, or there are too many people going in that direction, or what do you think?
Well, the part-time teaching I did was on the foundation course and on National Diploma in Coleg Marian Delyth.
Right.
And I enjoyed doing that because I just felt strongly that young people in rural Mid Wales or North Wales should have the same opportunity to see how they could develop into the field of photography if they chose to. I'm a great believer in teaching photography in the context of other media, as opposed to being just in photography. Or at least I think it's important for students of photography to be mixing and socializing with artists, as a visual artist. I don't think it should be in a narrow little sort of place kind of thing. But interestingly enough, the British Journal of Photography has currently got a series of articles on various colleges and their methods of teaching. And I think Paul Searight in Belfast his his theory is that what is important is encouraging young photographers to develop their own voice and their own, what the unique way that they see the world. And I think that's the way forward, really.
Do you think there's enough work for them out there?
No. I think years ago I remember reading somewhere that there were more photographers being trained in the UK than were working in the whole of Europe in one particular year. But that's true of all subjects, isn't it? All the people studying philosophy, it's not a reason for not studying philosophy.
Indeed not. No.
Or any other subject, really.
No. So do you think they're...
one thing I should say, of course, I don't think it's necessary for someone to go through formal education to become a photographer.
No.
And I think some of the very interesting work being done these days is by young people and not so young people who have never received a formal training.
Yeah.
And especially these days, there is so much opportunity really to teach yourself, isn't there?
Yes.
And on the internet, the wealth of images, too much really. I think it's visual diarrhea sometimes when you go on the internet.
If you had the opportunity, if somebody, a young person came along and said, and showed their portfolio to you, would you think about mentoring a young person?
Yes, I think it's hugely important. One thing that I don't see a lot of young photographers in this area at the moment, and I think it's a shame. Perhaps it's because they work in their own fields, don't they? They enjoy just taking pictures and using social media. But I really enjoyed teaching. I didn't enjoy the paperwork, and I didn't enjoy being too constricting, being constricted in what I should teach. But encouraging young people is hugely important because they're the future, and I think that I think people such as you and myself, I would like to think that we have got a few skills and to share. And really to help them to see themselves.
Yes, I think that's the... And I've noticed as well, I don't know, I've only done mentoring once, and I insisted that the ERD actually, Welsh League of Youth, for those of you who don't know, the ERD, big movement in Wales. And the last time I worked for them, I insisted that they actually bring somebody from the college to work with me during the Eisteddfod week for at least 3 days. Yeah. And just to follow me, and I could send them off on little briefs, etc.
Yes, yeah.
And that worked really well. But what I found was, I thought that young people were really quite confident, but there is not that confidence there, is there?
No, and you can understand why,
Yes.
And also the most difficult thing really is editing, isn't it? Selecting the work. I find it difficult, after all these years I still find it difficult to edit my own work. So you can imagine for young people it's so much more confusing really. And I think one of the great things we can do is actually point out to them, the merits in their work which they possibly are not seeing,
Yes. Maybe we should start a movement to mentor young kids.
Well, it'd be a great idea, I think.
Yes.
I do hold, I have workshops in the Arts Centre. And not just young people. I mean, recently, I've been involved also with people over 50, sort of, you can be young in mind even though you might be over 50. And I think a lot of people now, especially people, retiring early, appreciate the advice. And of course, digital photography means that it's revolutionised photography really.
Well, it's democratised it as well, isn't it?
And I think a lot of people appreciate guidance in how to, they enjoy taking pictures, but they do like a bit of guidance and gaining confidence really in making their own decisions about what makes a good picture.
Mentoring and the whole process of mentoring a young person, are we going back to a previous age of apprenticeships, and how do you think that could work practically with a professional photographer?
I mean, I'm a great fan of apprenticeships, I think. I think it had its merits. Yes, it goes back to an age where you were transferring a skill, which is not quite the same thing. We're talking something more. We are talking about sharing and, sort of developing skills, but also developing awareness, aren't we? And a method of working. And I think the advantage, if you've got the right, of course you could be unfortunate and not have the right person, but I mean with the right mix of one-to-one discussions, I think that is so much more valuable possibly than just sitting in a studio and just being given feedback occasionally from your projects.
Do you think that would be a way forward then? Do you think, well, I personally, I think that young people would gain an awful lot from just sitting with a professional photographer, even if from an editing point of view, and going through imagery, because we spend an awful lot of time in front of computers these days. I mean, I'm sure you're the same.
Yeah, that's another thing I was going to say is that, it's a difficult life, really. It's quite challenging. Yeah. And increasingly, I'm sure you find the same, that a lot of sources of income have dried up, So I think it's fair also to really make young people aware of that, or perhaps they are already aware of that. But I'm thinking also in terms of developing awareness and in terms of seeing the world around them and developing, not just in terms of using photography to earn a living, but in order to understand the world.
Yes, because education is not just getting a job.
It's not just about I mean, I've never had a huge buzz from earning money, in the sense that it doesn't give me huge excitement and, oh wow, I've earned such and such money. but creating a good image or producing a good image for my client and he's happy with it is far more rewarding. But we do need, unfortunately, if I could opt out of the capitalist system, I would do straight away now. But it's not easily done. And so whilst I've got bills to pay, I need bills to send out, Yeah. But it's really getting the balance and also making time, for good photography. Good photography in sort of rewarding and meaningful photography takes time. It's not about snapping. No. And I think too much snapping goes on these days. But perhaps I'm getting old.